It's now the money moment. The big decision made by Donald Trump today as another one looms. Plus, the head of FEMA under fire up on Capitol Hill. That's Topping the Hill on NewsNation tonight. It has become one of the more remarkable sights to see. SpaceX's 400-foot Starship rocket, the largest rocket ever built, taking flight over the skies of Texas. And today, President-elect Trump had a front row seat, accompanied by his new wingman, you could say, Elon Musk. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. The president-elect announcing today his Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. Lutnick, who is from Cantor Fitzgerald, the CEO there, a big financial services firm, now essentially will be one of the main players when it comes to Trump and China and what could happen with trade between the United States and China. The doctor, by the way, also got a different kind of call today. Trump selecting Mehmet Oz of TV fame, the former Senate candidate in Pennsylvania, to run the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. As we saw today, what goes up must come down. And tonight we begin with our national correspondent, Robert Sherman, with that, along with who's in and who's out. Robert?
Hey there, Blake. And without question, we've heard the president-elect say time and time on the campaign trail how much of an admirer he is of SpaceX and Elon Musk. Today, making the journey from Mar-a-Lago across the Gulf of Mexico over to Brownsville, Texas. And the Starship system he went to go watch is supposed to be critical to the ability to bring astronauts to Mars. By a similar token, Musk is viewed as critical to the president-elect in order to carry out the administration that he is looking for. And you have really seen ever since that watershed moment, the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, how much more prominent we have seen Elon Musk, especially neck and neck next to the president-elect here over the last few months. We've seen him sit in on phone calls with world leaders. We've seen him unabashedly vouch for who he wants to sit on the cabinet. And now taking on this position with the Department of Government Efficiency, colloquially known as DOGE, alongside Vivek Ramaswamy. Our sources saying that some internal staffing churning is starting to begin on that front there. In terms of what it will ultimately look like remains to be seen. And then there's one other name I think that is worth mentioning here. Bill Hagerty flying into Brownsville, Texas with the president-elect, standing next to him and Elon Musk as well. His name has been floated around as possibly being somewhere in the administration. Sources indicating that the top position, that is the number one focus right now, Secretary of Treasury, while there are a few meetings supposed to take place this week, still not a position that has been slotted yet. Blake?
Flying alongside the president today. Interesting to see our Robert Sherman live outside Transition headquarters at Mar-a-Lago. Robert, thank you. So SpaceX, the one behind the launch today, they hit a new high in another form this week. That company now being valued at some $250 billion on the private markets. Not apples to apples here, but for a little bit of context, NASA's budget, its budget over the past decade has totaled roughly $220 billion, and its budget request this year is for $25 billion. Now, NASA has a major presence in the state of Florida, for example, more than 2,100 employees, 19,000 contractors. Earlier, I spoke with the Republican senator from the state of Florida, Rick Scott. Senator Scott, thanks for being with us here on the Hill once again. Appreciate the time as always.
Great to be with you, Blake.
Yep, you as well. All right, so let's start for a second with space, because Elon Musk back in the news today with SpaceX. And I'm looking at NASA, Senator. You know it well because they have a big presence in your backyard in the state of Florida. And they've got a $25 billion budget. And the reality is, Senator, that Elon Musk is doing things that NASA could only dream of at this point in time. Why does NASA have a $25 billion budget, and do they need it? Do we need that?
Well, first, let me just say I'm really excited that Mehmet Oz is going to be the director of Center for Medicare and Medicaid. He just got announced, so He's a good friend. I'm glad for him. With regard to space. I think it's important that we continue the mission of NASA. I think it's important that we figure out how to continue space to all of our advantage. I think it's important that we continue to figure out how we make sure it's not militarized to harm Americans.
Okay.
So what the right number is for the budget, I couldn't tell you right now. I think it's important that we watch every dollar, I think Elon Musk is going to do a great job helping look at that, because look at what he's done with results.
Yeah, so
and
that's
way less cost.
So that's what I was going to ask you next, because he's leading up DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Would you have any issues of him looking into NASA, which again has a big presence in your state?
Absolutely not. Think about what he's going to do. Look at what he's accomplished with way less money than NASA would have spent if they did it on their own. So I'm excited. I'm excited for what he's going to bring to the table. I'm excited for what Vivek's going to bring to the table. I'm excited for what President Trump's bringing to the table. Because here's, for the first time since I've been up here, there's a real review of what our federal government should and shouldn't do, what regulations we need and don't need, what permitting we need and don't need. It's what I did when I won as governor of Florida back in November of 2010. I walked in and I figured out what regulations can we get rid of. That's what's going to happen up here. Streamline the permitting. That's what's going to happen up here. So it's been hard to get that done over the last 6 years, but now I have a partner in the White House. So it's going to be an exciting time for our country.
All right, let me ask you about a job. You were in the news, obviously, recently for running for the Senate Majority Leader role. John Thune won that nomination. You put out a letter today, Senator, to your colleagues, in which you said, quote, "I will do everything I can to help ensure his success as leader." When I watched over the weekend that UFC fight, Senator, and I saw Mike Johnson right behind Donald Trump there in Madison Square Garden with the president-elect. Mike Johnson was at Mar-a-Lago. For all we know, Senator Thune wasn't there, and we know he wasn't at Madison Square Garden. It leads to the question, Senator Scott, of do you think that Senator Thune is totally in on the Trump agenda like Mike Johnson is? Or are you still skeptical in any sense?
Well, here's what happened. We had an election last week. While I didn't win the election, and that was a disappointment, everybody agreed on these things. They agreed we're going to work our butts off to get the Trump nominees confirmed quickly. They're receptive to recess appointments, all right? We're going to work on the Trump agenda. We're going to have bills go through committee. We're going to, everything that Donald Trump ran on, we're going to work hard to make that happen. We're all going to be treated as equals. We're going to allow people to represent their state. This is exactly what I talked about 2 years ago when I ran against Mitch McConnell. The Senate had to change. I'm very optimistic that the senators are going to demand this change, and it's going to happen.
Any reservations, though, with Thune, Senator Thune?
He made a commitment to these things, and I believe everybody is going to do what they said they're going to do. So I'm going to work hard to do everything I can to make whoever the leader is successful. In this case, Senator Thune is the leader. I want him to be successful because guess what? That helps people back in my state. It helps with the Trump agenda, all these things.
I want to ask you about Laura Trump, because there is an open Senate seat with Senator Marco Rubio being nominated to be the Secretary of State. And you have been perhaps the biggest voice out there saying, you know what? Governor DeSantis should name Laura Trump to that seat. As you know, she was a pretty big political player this election cycle as the co-chair of the RNC. I wonder, Senator, what happens if Governor DeSantis doesn't do that? It's a fascinating dynamic, right? Because essentially, you could have Governor DeSantis interviewing Laura Trump. What happens if she doesn't get the seat?
First off, I'm excited for Marco Rubio. He's going to do a great job as Secretary of State. So I look forward to his confirmation, and I'm going to get to watch what he accomplishes. I think he's going to do a great job. He's got a great wife, so I'm excited for him. I think Laura Trump is the right person to replace him. He's going to be hard to replace. But here, I met her back when she worked at E-Networks, and she's a hard worker. She's committed. You watch what she did at the RNC this election cycle, what a great job she did on election security, making sure we got the vote out. I think she'll be a great partner, so I look forward to serving with her.
What do you? Let me leave you with this. What do you think Governor DeSantis is going through right now? Because it is an interesting situation for him, and there's a dynamic there, as you know, between you and the governor. So when you come out and say, it should be Laura Trump, I'm sure he saw those headlines. What do you think is before Governor DeSantis right now with this decision?
Well, it's an important decision, and I think he's going to pick Laura Trump because he knows she's clearly qualified. She's somebody that would be well received in the state of Florida, and somebody that could win the election when she would have to run in 2 years.
All right, Senator Rick Scott, got to leave it there. Nice to see you as always, sir. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill.
Hey, Blake. Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye-bye. Meantime, moments ago, up on the Hill, the Senate Armed Services Committee held a hearing with the Pentagon director who oversees reports on UFO sightings. It comes after the Department of Defense released its annual report on UFOs, also known as UAPs. The Pentagon office in charge of the sightings has been reviewing over 1,600 cases to date. Joining us now, NewsNation Washington correspondent Joe Khalil, who was up on the Hill attending that hearing. Joe, what's so remarkable about this, I think, is we had the House hearing last week, the Senate subcommittee hearing today. This was some of the first orders of business in both chambers right after the election.
It really is becoming something that's no longer stigma to talk about, and we're seeing it in both chambers. Blake, you're right. One of the first things we've seen. Big takeaways today from this hearing. The new director of Aero, John Kozlowski, very humbly said before the Senate that while they've investigated and resolved hundreds of cases, there are still several that are unresolved. Even after very intense scrutiny, they simply can't explain some of the phenomenon they're seeing on video and from firsthand credible witnesses. One story he told in detail of a law enforcement officer who saw an orange orb in the sky, drove to it, and I'll let you hear what he said happened next. Take a listen.
The area was well lit. He saw a blacker than black object. He said it was about the size of a Prius, 4 to 6 feet wide. And as he got 40 to 60 meters away from the object, it tilted up about 45 degrees, and then it shot up vertically. He says 10 to 100 times faster than any drone he's ever seen before. And it did that without making a sound as far as he could tell from inside of his vehicle. And just as it left his field of view through his windshield, then it emitted very bright red and blue lights.
He went on to say, we don't understand how something could move in that way that fast, and we have to assume it could be a national security issue. Like the other big takeaway, at the very end of the hearing, Senator Gillibrand asked the director there, what can we do as a Senate to help you? And his response was all of these whistleblowers that have come forward to you talking about undisclosed and illegal programs about reversed crashed UAP. Many of those people we've heard from here on NewsNation, tell them to come to us because many of them don't trust the agency or the Pentagon. And he says we could use your help directing them our way.
All right, Joe Khalil, live for us up on Capitol Hill. Joe, thank you. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the Hill, the head of FEMA gets grilled up on Capitol Hill today over the agency's hurricane response. What happened in that hearing, plus Trump attends the SpaceX launch just moments ago. But did you catch the moment after the launch between the two? I'm Blake Berman. Welcome to Washington. This is the center of politics, the Hill, here on NewsNation. Back in 4. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. So Florida normally gets some pretty cool sights from SpaceX launches, but today, Texas got the big show.
3, 2, 1.
Pretty remarkable stuff. That, of course, the 400-foot-tall Starship rocket taken off from Brownsville earlier this evening. The rocket returning to Earth, landing on a barge off the coast. President-elect Trump, you saw there, in attendance alongside Elon Musk. Joining us now here on the Hill, the former commander of the International Space Station. He is Leroy Chiao, joins us once again here on the Hill. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So they tried to, today, SpaceX, bring it back down in the chopsticks maneuver, which is basically it lands back where it took off. Explain to me why that didn't happen.
There are a number of parameters that have to be met before they even attempt to do that. Apparently, one or more of those parameters were breached, so they didn't even try. Of course, we saw them do that with flight number 5 just about 6 weeks ago, and that was successful. Yeah. Don't know why they weren't able to attempt it today, but it looked like a flawless launch. The great news is that Starship made it back through the atmosphere with the heat shields and the improvements and the changes all worked. There looked like there was a little bit of spot heating on one of the flaps, but it was a great improvement over last time. So with each successive flight, we get closer and closer to this system being certified and ready to go commercially. So they're very exciting. This is going to be disruptive. Yeah. It's a fully reusable system, which is really going to drive down launch costs quite a bit.
So I hear you use the word disruptive, right? That is a SpaceX flight. And when you look at NASA, obviously, and the last 50, 60 years, it's turning. And SpaceX right now, you could argue, is the leader in space right now. And I sit back here, there's all this conversation, and I asked the Florida Senator Rick Scott about it earlier. Tell me why we need to spend $25 billion on NASA. There's a lot of talk right now about cutting back on a lot of these government agencies. Tell me, why do we need to spend $25 billion a year on NASA?
Sure. I mean, you look at just compare the rockets, the Space Launch System, the SLS, NASA's rocket. It's not reusable at all. It costs somewhere, I think NASA's internal numbers are somewhere around $4.5 billion per launch. SpaceX, when we get down to it, when Starship is operational and fully reusable, it's going to be dramatically reduce the launch cost per kilogram, somewhere around about.
But aren't you making the argument there for SpaceX and not NASA?
Absolutely. And so NASA, frankly, NASA is not the agency it was when, during the Apollo days or even during the shuttle days. And unfortunately, what happens with just about every organization, the larger it gets, the more red tape you get, the more bureaucracy, the more inefficient. And also NASA, of course, you have to have congressional support. You've got to spread the work over all the states you can. And that, of course, breeds to more inefficiency. You've got 10 centers. God forbid we ever close one of those centers or more that we may not need. And so, NASA's kind of fighting with at least one, maybe 1.5 hands tied behind their backs. And so they're unable to do the efficient things that SpaceX is doing. So you make a very good point. I mean, SpaceX is doing leaps and bounds. I mean, the Starship's only been in development for about 10 years, and look what it's done.
All right, Leroy, we got to leave it there. Former commander of the International Space Station. What was that like? No, I'm joking. We got to leave it there. Thanks for joining us here on The Hill. We'll catch you next time. Leroy Chow, appreciate it, sir.
My pleasure.
You got it. All right, joining me now, T.W. Riggi, former communications aide to Senator Lindsey Graham, Brad Howard, Democratic strategist. Hello to you both. Nice to have you all in. That was fascinating because I was expecting him, if you had asked me, do you think he would stick up for NASA? I would think a former astronaut would, but he made the case, no, SpaceX is winning. So what do we do with NASA?
Well, look, I think it's a very dangerous precedent to turn over, and let's be clear, NASA's not just about going to space. There's a lot of stuff they do in the national security apparatus.
Yep. And with China, that's a big deal. And so Russia.
Turning it over to a company that has no boundaries or rules the way a government agency does or a top secret process to keep confidential information quiet is a problem because it empowers the company over the government, and that's a dangerous situation.
I'm not saying turn it over, but I'm just looking at there's been like a $220 billion budget over the last decade, and you got to wonder what's appropriate going forward.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest issue of NASA every year is that there are some on the Democratic side who think that money should be going to communities here on Earth that badly need it rather than outer space, and there are some Republicans who want to cut spending, and that's a place to start because it's not necessary. So this battle has been going on for years. I think Elon Musk certainly gives it some excitement, which is usually what NASA's biggest draw is. It excites the American people. But yeah, that's going to be a decision the elected officials are going to have to make, not one guy at one company.
I first covered Rick Scott, TW, back in 2010 in his primary, before a lot of folks even knew who he was. And Rick Scott ran on 3 things: jobs, jobs, jobs. Right? We talked to him at the beginning of the show. There's 2,100 jobs in Florida. Another 19,000 contractors. And that's the issue, right? If you start peeling back and you're saying, look, SpaceX is the winner here, What happens to those government jobs?
There's more jobs. Well, there's going to be a lot more private sector jobs in the future than there ever will be government jobs. Look, this is going to come down to the mission set of both organizations. I think NASA, as you mentioned, the national security component, I think that's right. I think there's also a science component, right, and an exploration component. SpaceX is to make humans interplanetary. Right. He's been very, very open about that. He wants civilian travel in space to be the future industry, who knows, the decades or centuries to come. So it's about different mission sets.
By the way, show the video real quick. The chopsticks thing didn't happen today. It did, obviously, as we know, last time. And there was a fascinating look of Elon Musk explaining to Donald Trump what happened here. And you have to wonder what was going through Trump's mind there.
It's cool as hell.
You think so? You think that's what it was? What's going through his mind there? What's going through his mind there, Brad?
I think Trump is smart. The reason I think he's smart to latch his horse to this wagon here or trail here is that it exudes power. Right? It's American power. We're controlling space, and that is something that's very appealing to Trump.
All right, still much more ahead here on the Hill. Thank you both. Hang on by. Still to come, what did the head of FEMA have to say about the government's hurricane response? We are live with a congressman whose district was in the middle of much of the heartbreak. We're back in 4 minutes here on the Hill. Hello, welcome back to the Hill here on NewsNation. New developments tonight in President-elect Trump's New York hush money case. The Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg suggesting that Judge Juan Marchand freeze the case while the president-elect heads to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, opposing Trump's attempt to dismiss the conviction of 34 counts. But how is the Trump team responding tonight? Our Kelly Meyer here with what's happening on the Hill and beyond. Hello, Kelly.
Hey there, Blake. So the Trump team is now weighing in on today's decision. A Trump spokesman saying, quote, Americans want an immediate end to the weaponization of our justice system, including this case, which should have never been filed. So we can, as President Trump said in his historic victory speech, unify our country and work together for the betterment of our nation. Now over to the Capitol, where Democrats may vote on the U.S. sending weapons to Israel. That could come up tomorrow. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders says there should be no more arms sales. He claims continuing to provide Israel with the offensive weapons it uses is morally wrong, as it is responsible for killing innocent civilians in Gaza. The Senate will vote on halting the $20 billion resolution tomorrow. And over in the House, where I spent much of my day today, lawmakers spent the morning and afternoon grilling FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell about the agency's response to hurricanes Helene and Milton. FEMA coming under fire in recent days after an employee advised workers to skip homes with Trump campaign signs. Criswell saying in the hearing today that she doesn't think that this is a widespread cultural problem within the agency. Listen to this.
There is nowhere in any FEMA policy, any training material or information that would direct any of our staff to avoid a home because of a political sign in their yard.
And that's what's happening in the Capitol, Blake.
So do we have a sense, Kelly, on this $100 billion package right now? At the end of the day, the folks in many of these states need help. Do we have a sense that Congress is going to actually pass this, and if so, when?
So right now we know President Biden requested that nearly $100 billion in emergency relief. He's telling House Speaker Johnson to get this done urgently. But then there are some Republican members who are saying, hey, there's unspent COVID dollars, and there's also unspent funds from previous earmarked hurricanes like Katrina that they think they can move over into the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund.
Kelly Meyer, live for us. Kelly, thank you. Seen a bit. Appreciate it. Joining us now is the Florida Republican Congressman Greg Steube, who represents Sarasota and neighboring areas. Congressman, thanks for being back with us. Here on the Hill, we were talking to you as these storms were hitting. You remember them well, obviously. The nearly $100 billion. At the end of the day, Congress, is it going to pass it? And if so, when do we think this is happening?
As the moment that SBA ran out of money, I was doing like town halls and roundtables in my district, hearing from business leaders who said if we can't get this SBA short-term disaster loan, there's no way we're going to be able to rebuild.
Yeah.
And think about this. You got 4 feet of water in your business. You've got to still pay people, but you can't open your business because you've got drywall you got to cut out. You've got to refurbish your restaurant. You've got to bring electrical wires out, all of the work that needs to be done to get it back up and operating. Well, some of those employees are obviously going to leave for other places where they can get work. It's a real problem. I called Speaker Johnson right after that roundtable and I said, when is SBA going to get refilled? He couldn't give me a time on that because he was waiting for the White House to give that number. Now that the White House has given that number,
here.
I am hopeful that he does it this week. I haven't had a conversation with him the last couple of days specifically about that, but I intend to. I have advocated for it. We have asked him to bring it up. I've got businesses in my district that won't be able to survive if they can't get those short-term disaster loans that simply are loans that are paid back, that people just need to be able to pay their employees, fix the things that insurance weren't able to cover, to get back up on their feet so that they can continue to have their business. If they don't have these loans, they're going to go out of business and people are going to lose their jobs.
Yeah, and no, it's why we've been continually covering it and continually talking about it. There was, of course, the story that has been out there about a FEMA employee who was fired, allegedly basically not taking to the needs of those who had Trump signs in their yards. One of those people spoke to Dan Abrams last night. I want to get your reaction on the other side.
That came from my direct superior, and what's also important with that is that's just for that moment and for that day. We have other days where we were able to canvass certain areas that were strong campaign supporters of Trump.
So she was that's the fired FEMA employee. Do you believe, Congressman, that there are more cases like this to come?
So I sent an email out to my district asking people in just my district if they had been affected. Now, I only have 60,000 people on our email list, and we had 35 people reach out to my office with specific instances where they believe that FEMA overlooked them or didn't stop by their house or they had a Trump sign or whatever the case may be.
What did they tell you?
I mean, each case was different. So you've got just 35 incidents in my district. This worker, there was another article today about another FEMA worker who'd worked there for 5 years that said it was a well-known policy that they didn't go to Trump supporters or conservative houses. So I'm about to go and ask Deanna Criswell some of these questions specifically from my district, and I look forward to a real investigation being done. She finally agreed today after Scott Perry asked her of an IG investigation, so it would be separate and they could run their own investigation, and she said that she would do that. So we'll see if she's true to her word.
Congressman, I know you got to run, but real quick, what changes do you want to be made at FEMA when Donald Trump takes the White House?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't be giving money to illegal immigrants in our country. The current law allows them to give to qualified aliens, which are people that were paroled or are claiming asylum. Well, that's most of the 12 million illegals that have come across our country. Why are we giving hard-earned taxpayer dollars to illegal immigrants when we have citizens of our country who their entire homes have been taken off the foundation? They should be first. They should be the focus of FEMA. That should be the focus of SBA. That should happen on day one.
Congressman, I know you got to get back to the day job. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Greg Steube, Republican from the West Coast there of Florida. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, joining me now here again, Kelly Meyer, Brad Howard, Democratic strategist. All right, I think at the end of the day, folks just want to make sure the money gets out the door.
Correct.
I don't, right? Like, they need the money. You heard from the congressman. Yep. And now there's the conversation here in Washington, Brad, of is this going to happen? Is this just a matter of when and not if? From your read, you have a lot of experience in this lane. Yeah,
I worked at SBA, at the Small Business Administration, and in the House. And what I'll tell you is that nearly every House Democrat is calling for a massive investment in a disaster supplemental, as we call it on the Hill. President Biden today introduced a $100 billion proposal for hurricanes and other disaster supplemental. That is out there now. But the real issue here is that Mike Johnson could have put this on the floor weeks ago. Even when they're not in session, you could have done it by unanimous consent. You just need 3 members here in Congress to do that. He didn't have to bring the whole chamber back. The reason he won't do it is because the far right part of the Republican conference demands that these things be paid for. And that's going to be the issue.
No responsibility, though, for President Biden in the White House?
It's not a requisite that he has to submit a request in order for Johnson to act.
You're talking about congressional procedures, right? And I take you at your word.
No, I'm saying intent. Where's Johnson's proposal? Why hasn't he done anything and put a bill on the floor when they ran out of cash 4 months ago?
Sorry, I was going to respond just because I talked to Johnson's office about this, and they have said that they were waiting to see what the receipt was basically from Hurricanes Helene and Milton. But I will also say that, covering this today, also covering recoveries from a hurricane, I moved to the Caribbean to cover the response to Irma and Maria. It is important to follow where the dollars are going specifically. So that's what Republicans are saying. But there also was this new whistleblower that they talked to, Comer, in this oversight committee hearing.
James Comer.
James Comer, the chairman, saying that there's a new whistleblower coming forward saying that there was another house that asked them to remove Trump campaign materials and signs from their yard before there was help. So I think what they're focusing on here today is making sure that the money that they do have is getting to the people that need it.
If you take the congressman at face value, that call it a few dozen folks had similar stories, where does this go?
It's a big, big problem. I mean, I think it's what seems to be happening here is there's an interpretation of how to protect yourself from all these. You got to keep in mind the far right was causing all these conspiracy theories that they were trying to go develop minerals in the land, and there was real concern about armed militias showing up to attack FEMA workers. So there was a directive that went out and said, protect yourself. If you see a situation, you may harm yourself, don't do it. I think
wasn't that in North Carolina and the Congress?
No, I know, but I'm saying that was the context of why this directives went out across the country. And so I do think some could have easily misinterpreted that and skipped Trump houses thinking it was a risk to themselves. They should have clarified the policy. So this, to me, this is all around failure of FEMA. They've got to address this, and it should never happen again.
All right, we'll leave it there. You two, stay here. Other side of the break, still to come, full panel. Last night, the late-night host, Jon Stewart, has a strong message that he gave out for both Democrats and Republicans. What he had to say. Full panel, other side of the break. You're watching The Hill here on NewsNation.
Bill O'Reilly on Cuomo.
You're right, Cuomo, and that hurts me to say.
America's favorite sparring duo with TV's liveliest, most honest debate.
I took notes, Cuomo, for you.
Tomorrow at 8/7 Central, only on NewsNation.
All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. This year's presidential election showed us just how divided in some parts the country is, and that division is now impacting business, with some consumers paying more attention to where they shop, looking for companies that share similar values as them. Donald Trump Jr., for example, could be looking to take advantage of that. The president-elect's son reportedly has joined the venture capital firm 1789, which invests in the, quote, anti-woke economy, companies that espouse conservative values as well. Full panel here with me now. T.W. Origi, former communications aide to Lindsey Graham, Mike Pompeo as well. Kelly Meyer, NewsNation Washington correspondent. Cheyenne Daniels, race and politics reporter for TheHill.com. Brad Howard is a Democratic strategist. All right, T.W., tell me what's happening here.
Yeah, look, I think even by the Democrats' own numbers, the number 3 biggest mover among voters was what they considered the woke agenda, which I think is the definition of woke has shifted over time. I believe it's now become virtue signaling from a lot of people, and people are seeing it not only from their neighbors who are fearful of backlash or getting canceled if they don't say the right thing, but they're saying it from corporations, and they're not feeling very good about it. And you obviously saw Bud Light had a hiccup a few years ago. Right. Zinn now, Tucker Carlson's getting in the game there. I consume both products.
Okay.
And I still do. But I think people are just sick of being told that they're a bad person because they're not keeping up with the far left agenda of a certain segment of people.
So you were warning on this show, Brad, about the trans issue before the election, saying Democrats really need to wake up to this and better be able to speak about it. Are you on the same wavelength here?
Yeah, but let's be clear. What I think it's coming from, and I think this resentment to this, whatever y'all are calling woke, but I think even in the Democratic coalition, there's a lot of frustration. You talk to a lot of folks in the black and brown community who saw after the Black Lives Matter movement all the lip service to DEI, but all the boards were still white, and there was no actual change. So this idea of virtue signaling is as offensive to our side as it is your side, and I think it drives into this problem with the Democratic Party at the moment, where we are kind of being dictated to by a small cauldron of college-educated white progressive elites who think they know better than everybody else.
There is unquestionably, Cheyenne, in the business world, a pullback, whether you think it's good or you think it's bad. There is unquestionably a pullback with ESG, environmental, social, and governance at a lot of these big companies, and with DEI as well.
Yeah, and you know what I think I find really interesting is that we're seeing this pullback, right? And you can talk about not just Bud Light and these companies, but you also have places like Harley Davidson, Tractor Supply. They're saying, we have to give our consumers what they want. We know who the consumers are who are coming to us. But of course, then on the flip side of that, you have people who are saying, we just saw a new survey come out today from YouGov that's showing most Americans aren't using terms like woke and white privilege and things like that in their everyday language, but it's still impacting them enough when they see these policies to say, well, I'm not quite sure I want to shop somewhere that maybe doesn't believe in
without
those.
saying the term, but knowing sort of the issue set or the context. Right?
Yeah, it's enough that consumers are saying, maybe that's not where I want to spend my money.
I saw a headline that was fascinating. This was in Market Watch. Show it real quick. I'm a Democrat who drives a Tesla. A guy shouted abuse at me for driving a car made by Elon Musk. Am I a hypocrite? Should I sell my car? And that's the conversation, Kelly, that a lot of Democrats are wrestling with right now.
It makes me think of when I was on the campaign trail, there was always this Tesla, the Cybertruck?
Yeah.
But he had like a big Donald Trump in the back, blow up, and was anti-Trump, but had the Elon Musk car. So, every which way. People
I was driving, I'll let you finish this off, but I was driving the other day, and I quite literally, I was stopped, took out my phone and took a picture of it because it was a Tesla with the bumper sticker, anti-Elon Tesla Club, and I believe. And I'm sitting back thinking, how did all this, because he supports Trump, that's why you don't like him?
Well, so I saw a bumper sticker that said, I bought this when he wasn't crazy. I've seen that one too. Okay. What I will say is, if you bought the Tesla to virtue signal, then yeah, you look stupid right now. If you bought the Tesla because you like the car, who cares who made it, right? And so I think you've got to take a deep dive into yourself. If you're buying cars to impress people and look great and look progressive, you're probably buying for the wrong reason.
All right. Meantime, last night, the late night host, Jon Stewart, had some strong words for Democrats in his Daily Show monologue. He says Democrats need to fight harder. Watch.
Republicans exploit the loopholes. Democrats complain about the norms over and over and over, and it has ghastly consequences. To get anything done, the Democrats feel like they must thread the needle to make sure, we have to make sure each norm follows the overly complex bureaucratic process that we created ourselves. The parliamentarian, I can't do it because the norm says, I can't get anything done.
Is that what it is? CW?
This is typical Jon Stewart. Very funny, very smart, but kind of missing the boat.
What's the boat?
He talked about recess appointments and he talked about judicial appointments. Barack Obama had 32 recess appointments, Clinton had 139. We haven't even got approval for Trump to do any of it yet. When it comes to judiciary, the Republicans had control of the Senate. He neglected to mention that. And the second time was they smeared the hell out of Brett Kavanaugh, and we thought that crossed the line to try to scuttle him. So I think he's off on that. I think the Democrats lost for a cacophony of reasons that we could talk for hours about. Love Jon Stewart, but he's
let me clarify something you said. The last recess appointment for a cabinet secretary, I believe, was in '96, and we've never had one used to surpass the confirmation process.
And I would agree with you. I don't think it should be done for cabinet appointments.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying. But what I will say, what John is pointing to is I consider myself a legal Machiavellian Democrat.
Okay.
We keep adding these restrictions.
Coming up tomorrow on the Hill. What is that?
We keep adding restrictions to ourselves. We're not going to take corporate PAC money. We're going to do this. And the Republicans are just amassing these resources to kill us at the ballot box. And we got to stop this virtual signaling and try to win.
Let me just say, didn't they break a ton of norms with the IRS in 2010 or with this Hunter Biden case? Hadn't they broken a lot of norms at DOJ with a lot of law?
This is my point. We do this anyway, so why are we trying to be pious about it? Just get in there and win.
Is what you're listening to here sort of some of the conversation that Democrats are having right now trying to figure, what do we do next?
I think this is what Jon Stewart's pointing to is something that many Democratic supporters have been saying, which is, why are we so nice?
Yes.
Why are we always so nice? We had the wonderful, beautiful Michelle Obama sitting there saying, when they go low, we go high. And then she changed her tune this election cycle. Democrats didn't keep up with that.
The Obamas were, when they go low, we go lower this cycle.
They said, we're done pulling
went
punches.
Out the door.
So it's a little bit of that, when are we going to stop with the niceties? When are we going to start playing hardball? That's what we need to do.
What I think is so interesting with Jon Stewart, I think a lot of Democrats think that he's already on Democrats' side, on Democrats' team, and he's going to call it out. And he has been interesting this elections. He's always interesting, but he has been this election cycle talking about specifically, and even before with Biden calling him out, saying things that we were asking about in the briefing room, bringing up comments from Jon Stewart on his show and asking Karine Jean-Pierre to react to that because he was kind of talking about Biden and dropping out of the race or, being too old to do this again. So he's kind of telling it like it is, and he will say that for either side from working with him on the Hill on veterans issues. He doesn't care who it is, Democrat or Republican, he'll talk about it.
I'll leave the audience with this. When they walked in during the commercial break, Brad said, you got to follow TW's Instagram because he drops presidential knowledge daily. Today's birthday is who?
It is James Garfield. Little fun fact about James Garfield. Very bright man. He had a party trick where he could write Greek in one hand and Latin in another simultaneously.
There you go. It's a little knowledge from TW Urigi.
By penmanship, by-handed. I don't know.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the Hill, the Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace introduces a bill that has this town talking. And she is speaking with Leland Vitter next hour. Leland joins me on the other side of the break. On NewsNation, the South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace introducing legislation that would require members of Congress to use the bathrooms matching their gender from birth. Now, it comes 2 months before the Delaware State Senator Sarah McBride is sworn into Congress. McBride will be the first openly transgender member of Congress. And this is what she posted on social media earlier today. Quote, this is a blatant attempt from far right-wing extremists to distract from the fact that they have no real solutions to what Americans are facing. We should be focused, she says, on bringing down the cost of housing, health care, and child care, not manufacturing culture wars, end quote. Host of On Ballots, Leland Vitter, joins me live. You have a fascinating interview coming up in your show. Congresswoman Nancy Mace.
She is here, and there's a few things to this now, right? Because now she's talking about extending this not just to Capitol Hill, but to all federal property. Which would be a big, big change in terms of the direction of the government. I think what's most interesting about this story is Democrats' continued blindness on it. Because
we were just talking about
the most effective part of Donald Trump's campaign was his closing ad that ended with Kamala Harris's they, them, Donald Trump is for you. And the gaslighting and the lack of recognition that there are a lot of women who do not want to share a bathroom with biological men. That's not a culture war to them. That's an issue of dignity and of women's rights and of safety. The refusal to acknowledge that just continues to baffle me.
You and I were just talking in the break about television pundits.
Yes.
Brad Howard, who was just here on the show, and you have Brad on your show, came in before the election as a Democrat and said, I'm telling you, this transgender issue, we don't have an answer for it. And we saw on the election and afterwards how Democrats now have to try to figure out a way to navigate this one. You also have Tommy Tuberville, senator, on your show.
You know what his nickname was? This is apropos considering where we are. In this
coach?
Obviously the coach, but as a coach, his nickname was the Riverboat Gambler. Because of how often he would go for it on fourth down. He was ahead of his time in many ways.